Now, Mr. Zhang, I would like to start with you. What is the definition of the status of currency manipulator? Exactly what must China do to qualify for that status?
In the United States, if the government is willing to, define one country as a currency manipulator, there are three criteria, including, balance payments of current account and, trade surplus to the United States, how high this type of trade surplus. Meanwhile, within 1 year, how much currencies, U.S. dollars, will be brought by China. In my mind, I think that at least one of them is not satisfied the United States standard. For example, today China's balance payments of current account only account for 2.4% of China's GDP, lower than 3% of standard signed by the United States. This is one thing. Second thing, yes. I have to emphasize that, actually manipulator, this type of procedure should be mentioned by Secretary of Commerce in the United States, and there will be 1 year negotiation period. By the United States,
yes,
United President.
Yes, now the latest statistics coming out of the United States on the 7th of February is that for 2016, trade surplus between China and the United States actually had a drop of 5.5% year on year and standing at $350 billion US dollars. Is that in line with the kind of a definition of a currency manipulator in your mind, this $350 billion US dollars trade deficit with China? Mr. Zhang.
Yeah, I think that of course China's trade surplus are quite high compared with the standard. But this type of trade surplus actually mainly caused by China's economic structure and the United States, U.S. economic structure. U.S. their manufacturing sectors only made about 15% to their GDP, but in China this proportion higher to 40%. Another thing is that due to global value chain, actually so a lot of trade surplus belonging to transfer surplus. According to our study, more than 1/3 of China's surplus to the United States actually earned by those parts provider, such as Japan, South Korea. So actually China's net trade surplus, true trade surplus, not so high. Actually should cut at least 1/3.
Now, Mr. Barrow, let me come to you at this moment. What do you think of China's trade with the United States is standing at this moment? Does China qualify for a potentially currency manipulator status?
This argument about currency manipulation is basically some kind of a legal trick. It doesn't really have anything much to do with the economics of the situation. Certainly China interfered a lot more with the exchange market if you go back 10 years or more. It's not really relevant in the current situation. So as was just mentioned, there is a large trade surplus that China has with the US. It's over $300 billion a year. Whether that's a good or a bad thing for the US and China is not completely clear. I mean, the US is getting a lot of valuable imports at attractive prices. That's a very positive thing, particularly for poorer people in the United States. At the same time, China is able to export a lot of goods and services, and that's helping their production for their economy. It's a little surprising that the bilateral trade deficit that the US has with China has not changed very much since after the financial crisis. Since 2010, it's been pretty level, although it used to be a bigger deficit before that. So I'm a little surprised it hasn't changed more with China increasing its levels of imports from the U.S., and I would expect that to happen over time, but I don't think it's that China is damaging the U.S. in any way with this situation.
Now, basically, the latest statistics coming out of the U.S. Commerce Secretary actually suggests that China's trade deficit with the United States is dropping by 5.5% year on year. And December of last year has been the 5th consecutive month that the trade deficit between China and the United States has been shrinking. What do you think could be potentially the reason behind that? Is China increasing? Has China been increasing its export, or has China been increasing its imports from the United States, or some other reasons?
You know, that's a very short-run perspective. Since 2010, which is over 6 years now, the trade deficit has been fairly stable, actually, at something over $300 billion a year. So it's not clear yet that there's been a marked change in that. I would expect it to shift over time, and I think it would be good if China became more open to foreign business activity, and it did things in terms of property rights protection, particularly in terms of intellectual property. Those would be positive steps. Steps that would encourage more consumption of households in China would be good. I think China's been moving in that direction. And along with the expanding consumption, you would expect more imports of goods and services from the U.S. So I think over time that will happen. But it hasn't happened so much as of yet.
Mr. Zhang, yes, please go ahead.
I like to emphasize on China's import because now China's resident income is climbing up. And nowadays, every year, China's import is climbing up also, especially from developed economies such as the U.S. So this is one reason. Another thing I like to add, a very interesting phenomenon, that is in 2005, at that time, RMB actually depreciated according to the U.S. saying. So started from that year, RMB against the U.S. dollar actually appreciated until 2015. Appreciation degree was about 40 to 50%. I mean the true real effective exchange rate. But if you look at China's trade surplus against the U.S., China's trade surplus to the U.S. actually didn't shrinking. So this phenomenon shows that RMB exchange rate is not an important factor for U.S. trade deficit against China.
So by branding China a currency manipulator is not going to solve the trade imbalance between China and the United States. Anyway, let's talk about the procedural matter, because it is very important in this whole thing. Now, as Mr. Zhang, you have mentioned, Donald Trump cannot just start calling China a currency manipulator from day one, as he said he was going to do during the campaign trail. But why did he say that anyways? He threatened to impose 45% tariff on Chinese exports. He cannot do that without consent from without getting the approval from the Congress. And basically, the United States would also have to renegotiate with China before it can do that, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Zhang, please.
I think that in the U.S., actually, there are a lot of rules and regulations. So in case that Trump wants to, regarding China as a manipulator, a first step, actually, the Secretary of Commerce in the United States should provide a report to the U.S. Congress, and then that there will be 1 year of negotiation. That means Trump needs to negotiate with Chinese government, and then within that 1 year they will require the Chinese side to make some of changes. So I think that without those procedures, Trump cannot directly, regard China as manipulators.
Now, Mr. Barrow, let me come to you. So it is very obvious that Trump cannot brand China a currency manipulator as he threatened to do from day one. Why do you think he still went ahead and make this kind of statements? What do you think he's trying to achieve, knowing that he's not going to do that from day one anyway?
This is basically a political negotiation. The U.S. administration has even said that Germany is a currency manipulator, even though Germany does not have its own currency, being part of the euro. It's completely irrational from an economic standpoint. I think they're trying to set the stage for a political negotiation, and I think with China it'll be a bilateral discussion, and hopefully out of that will come some useful reforms. China can open up more, and the U.S. can be more accommodating. Eventually, it would be great if we could have a bilateral trade agreement with China. I think the U.S. is moving more towards bilateral agreements. They're going to try to do that with the UK. They're going to try to do that with Japan. Down the road, maybe with China. So I think that could be positive.
Yeah, but we have the WHO. Both China and the United States are members of the WHO. There are set rules which we have all committed to, and basically trade relationship between the two countries have been growing on such basis. Aren't that good enough?
I think you mean the WTO.
WTO,
so that would
I'm
be
sorry,
about about the legal status, but I don't think that's really the essence of the argument here. I think it's going to be more of a political debate and negotiation. China and the U.S., they start with this basic false perspective. That's what is really good is exports, and what is really bad is imports. Yeah. So somehow then Trump is making the argument that the U.S. is being cheated because China, relatively speaking, has a lot more exports than imports in terms of our bilateral relationship. And of course, the U.S., in fact, is benefiting greatly from the imports of good quality products at low prices. But both countries start from that false narrative about what is good and bad for trade. And that actually puts the U.S. in a strong political bargaining situation to make changes with respect to how the respective countries deal with openness. So I think, in fact, China is going to be in a weak position in terms of bargaining because they really can't afford to eliminate this $300 billion trade surplus, given what they're expressing as a great value of having this large volume of exports to the U.S. Yeah. So that does politically put the U.S. in a stronger position.
Mr. Zhang, what is your thoughts on this statement, on this argument?
WTO rules and regulations is very critical for trade relationship between China and the U.S. Trump authority has no right to, impose 45% of tariff directly on China, because as a WTO member, U.S. has to provide, most favorite treatment nation, this type of treatment to China. In this regard, actually, in case they want to punish Chinese side, I can, imagine that during Obama, authority, at that time, Obama claimed that within 1 year, his government actually raised 7 cases of anti-dumping against China. So I can imagine that for a Trump administration, maybe within 1 year, 14 or 30 cases, that would be possible. But that's just the first step. That's belonging to trade friction. And then I'm afraid that if we cannot deal with well, so that means maybe cause trade war. So from Chinese side, because today China can import so lot of goods from and services from the United States, in case that the United States is not so good, cannot provide good treatment for Chinese side, Chinese also will have very bad treatment for the U.S. side. even if China can reduce their investment in the United States, also will reduce job opportunities in the United States.
Then really it's a trade war which there will be no winner, as Chinese President Xi Jinping has made very clear during his latest speech to the Davos annual meeting. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have to leave it there. That was Mr. Zhang Jianping from the Chinese Academy of International and Economic Cooperation and Mr. Robert Barrell, President of the Western Economic Association.